my wife received an invitation to a store opening. I don't think I'll ever see her again. Darren, did you know they opened a Target in Owingsville? My wife, Deborah, asked me excitedly. Grab the car keys and let's go check it out. I rolled my eyes. It was almost 6 in the evening, and I had a long day at work. The prospect of an hour's drive there, 2 hours of shopping, and an hour's drive home wasn't appealing. They didn't open a damn Target in Owingsville, I replied curtly. Only about 2,000 people live there. Why in the hell would a multi-billion-dollar corporation open a store in the middle of the sticks in a town that isn't big enough to support a McDonald's? Squealing wood on tile penetrated my ears as she pushed the bar stool away from the kitchen counter. Her footfalls approaching my chair were heavy, like a pouting child's. I should have known better than to start an argument with her about Target. She dropped something from above me. A glossy red mailer advertisement sailed through the air over the top of my head. I looked down at my lap to see the familiar red and white logo. The cluster of red-vested employees smiled up at me from the shiny cardstock. Target would like to welcome you to our newest location in Owingsville. Bring this ad to the registered for an additional 10 off of your first purchase. She worshipped the damn place. We lived in Lexington, Kentucky, and she made the rounds between all three. The clearance queen, she called herself. Deb would buy clearance items by the carload from any Target within a reasonable drive and resell them on Amazon. Retail arbitrage, I think she called it. Don't get me wrong. She made some decent money with it. We were middle-aged and empty nesters when she started. Her entire life had been devoted to raising the kids. When Dustin and Jessica left for college, she struggled a bit, stirred around the house like a caged animal. I pushed her to find a hobby. It was a few years before I would retire. Most of her friends worked. That's when the Target clearance sprees started. Owingsville is almost an hour away, and there are 3 damn Targets here in town, I said. Irritation building. Why do we need to drive out to the middle of nowhere to get what we could find in town? My wife went back to the kitchen and started washing the dishes. Every movement she made was exaggerated to show her displeasure. Cabinets closed so hard they were just shy of a slam. Glasses hammered on the counter so hard that I expected to hear them shatter. She signed at least 3 times a minute. I wish I hadn't given in. If I had just stood my ground, maybe everything would have been all right. Our family would still be whole. Police detectives wouldn't stop by the house every week just for a chat. But I did give in. I agreed to go. Grab your purse and put on your shoes. I huffed, pushing myself out of the recliner. We can go, but no more than an hour of shopping. I've got to work in the morning, so we can't fool around all night. She squealed with excitement and ran off to the bedroom. Why the hell did I agree to go? The drive to Owingsville was uneventful. NPR news stories played on the radio as my wife fidgeted with her cell phone. While I had been mildly irritated before we left the house, I was almost to a raging boil by the time we got to Owingsville. It was an hour's drive to the middle of the country, and my wife looked at Amazon listings the entire drive. We had already reached the center of Owingsville, and the GPS said there were still 2.5 miles to go. From the overhead view on the map, the address was a good distance outside of town, headed toward Moorhead. The location of the store was making less sense at the moment. Are you sure you put the right address in the GPS? I asked Deborah. She didn't answer, still scrolling through her phone. Deborah, I said a bit louder. She looked up at me and smiled. The sweetness of it cooled my anger down to a dull simmer. I even felt bad for being angry. Her life had changed so much in the last year, and this was something she did to pass some lonely times. Sweetie, are you sure you put in the right address? I really don't think this can be right. Deb leaned over, pulled out the cardstock advertisement from her purse, and looked at the address. Reaching over, she pulled the GPS from the dashboard and punched a few buttons. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see a confused expression on her face. Yeah, she said. It's the right address. The weird thing is that the GPS just corrected itself. It was down to 2 miles, and I jumped back up to 2.5 miles. She still says it's straight ahead on the right. I wasn't concerned yet, but I was confused. The GPS clearly said 2.5 miles when we pulled out of Owingsville onto the dark country lane. We had been on the road for nearly a minute. It could have been a glitch in the software, but it still left me with an uneasy feeling. My eyes darted back and forth from the GPS screen and the darting yellow lines in the center of the road. The mileage was decreasing as it should have, and I felt relieved, only a mile ahead. We would be there soon. I looked back at the road and looked for parking lot lights in the distance. You missed your destination. Please make a U-turn when able and head back 2.5 miles. Your destination will be on the right side of the road. What the hell? I said it in a panic. The Jeeps had just said 1 mile only moments before. There was no way I had driven 1.5 miles past a huge department store on the side of a dark country highway and missed it. You've got to be kidding me. I pulled the car onto the shoulder and made a U-turn. As we drove back in the direction that we came, I fluttered with nervous energy. Something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Was I zoning out while we drove? Was the GPS malfunctioning? Did the damn store even exist? Just a moment before I was going to tell my wife we were heading home, I could see an unnaturally bright light ahead in the woodline. The tops of parking lot lights peeked over the top of the forest. I turned to Deborah to voice my concern, but her face was painted with a satisfied grin. "I told you we'd find it," she exclaimed with excitement. We pulled around the tree line to see an immense parking lot in front of the brightly lit store. There were maybe 3 cars parked on the far side of the lot. The car returns were empty. It looked like no one had been there other than a few employees. You were all worked up over nothing. I pulled the car into a parking space closest to the door. We got out and started walking toward the entrance. There was emotionless elevator music playing in the parking lot. I looked up toward the tops of the light poles, but didn't see any speakers. None of the Targets in Lexington played the canned music, and it filled me with a strange sense of dread. It was as though it came from nowhere. Even the entrance to the building was strange. While most stores have an entrance directly in the center of the building or 2 mirrored entrances on each end of the building, there was only one here. It was almost directly at the far right corner of the building. I looked to my left and saw the 3 other cars in the lot were parked all the way to the right. Maybe there was an employee door on the side of the building, but I couldn't see a walkway. There were 4 or 5 feet of grass between the parking lot and the edge of the building. Something about the exterior was off-putting as well. Every other store I had seen was a cream or beige color with a few red awnings, and a red Target logo next to the store name. Not this one. The entire building was fire engine red. It reminded me of the unrealistically bright blood from the old 1980s slasher films, where there would usually be only one Target logo. The building was covered in them. Hundreds maybe, all different sizes. Some of the larger logos had smaller ones between the red and white circles. A few overlapped. Strangest of all, there was no sign that just said Target. "Deb, something about this is weirding me out," I said hesitantly. "Let's come back tomorrow during the day. It looks like they could be closed anyway. There are not many cars in the lot." She stopped and turned toward me. The exuberant grin had vanished from her face and was replaced by a set of furrowed brows. Her body was slightly rigid and her head turned slowly from side to side. "We drove an hour to get her, and you nearly got us lost twice," she said angrily. "Don't you think for a second we're going home? If you're going to act like an ass the whole time, go wait in the car." I was a bit dumbstruck. Deb was usually soft-spoken and sweet. Only a handful of times had I ever heard her curse. Never at me. She turned and went through the sliding doors at the front of the store. Hurt and angry, I went back to the car. For the first 30 minutes, Deb was inside. I scanned the parking lot like a prey animal, searching for a hunter. No cars passed on the main road and no one pulled into the parking lot. There was no motion that I could detect through the glass doors into the building. Occasionally, a light would flicker in the parking lot. Otherwise, things seemed relatively normal. I tried to call Deborah once or twice, but didn't get an answer. Halfway through a lengthy, apologetic text message, I decided to leave her alone. She probably needed time to cool off, and Target bargain shopping was probably the best medicine for that. At some point, I fell asleep. It wasn't intentional, but there's only so much aimless scrolling on a smartphone I can do before I start to nod in and out. Once I start to drift, an involuntary nap is always in my future. I had been asleep for around 45 minutes when my cell phone began to buzz in my hand. Startled by the sudden motion, I looked down at my phone. There was a text message from Deb. I thought it was just Deb telling me she was running behind, but checking out. Help me. The messaging was confusing. Did she want help carrying something to the car? Was there something she wanted my opinion on? I sent a reply. What do you need help with, sweetie? No response. 3 minutes passed. I tried again. You okay? Another few minutes and still no reply. I'm getting worried. Do I need to come in? I waited for another minute, but she never texted me back. Unsnapping my seatbelt, I pushed the door of the car open and felt resistance and a loud smack, looking to my left. There was a yellow car next to me. It hadn't been there when I went to sleep, and I had just slammed my door into the side of it. There was just enough room for me to slide out, so I wedged myself sideways and closed my door. Bending over, I looked at the side of the yellow car where my door had made contact. There was no dent or mark. With relief, I stood and turned to head toward the door. I was started by an ocean of yellow cars. There were dozens of makes and models, but each vehicle in the lot was yellow. Almost every single parking space was filled, but there was no one in the parking lot. When I turned to head toward the door, there was no one moving around inside that I could see from there. My stomach dropped. Something was wrong. When I passed through the entryway doors, the store looked like it should, with a few exceptions. All of the registers were self-checkouts, with no place for an attendant. Where you would expect to find a customer service department, there was an empty red wall. There was a cart corral, but it stood empty. All of the products I could see on the shelf had no writing. Just the Target logo and a picture of what was inside. Strangest of all was the lack of people. The only noise in the building was a keyboard version of The Girl from Ipanema. It had a tinny quality to it, as though it were playing from a World War I era radio. Crackles of static pierced through occasionally, causing me to wince. Hello? I said it loudly. It wasn't quite a shout, but there was more volume to it than in my normal speaking voice. It took most of my willpower not to scream at the top of my lungs. But I didn't want to make myself seem unstable if it turned out there were other people in the store. There has to be someone else here, I thought to myself. Why the hell would the parking lot be full if no one was inside? No one answered my call. Excuse me, I said it a bit louder. My footfalls almost seemed to echo as I walked into the store. Deborah, can you hear me? Silence. Is anyone in this damn building? I screamed. My temples were throbbing, and it felt like the canned music pouring from the speakers grew louder to drown out my calls. I was running down the aisles, looking side to side frantically, passing row after row of generic shelves filled with red packaging. I screamed my wife's name over and over. My phone vibrated in my pocket, and I pulled it out. Please get me out of here. A chill ran up my spine. Can you hear me screaming for you? The ellipsis bubble popped up, showing she was typing a response. No, I can only hear the red men. I'm hiding from them in the bathroom. I didn't have time to register what she meant by the red men. Breaking into a run, I headed toward the back of the store. As I passed by the clothing section, I panicked and jumped back, slamming into a rack filled with clothing. A red-faced man was standing on a platform behind the rows of clothing. Terrified, I pushed myself backward and hid behind a shelf. There was no sound of movement, only the tinny music playing from overhead. I couldn't decide if the red man hadn't seen me. After a few moments, I slowly peeked my head around the shelf toward the clothing section. The man stood stoically behind the rows of clothing, bright lines of light reflected off of his smooth body. He didn't move at all. It's a mannequin, I thought. Move your ass and find Deborah. I stood and walked back around the shelf. Without the lens of fear, I could see that the shiny red man was only a mannequin. There were no clothes on it yet. Maybe the store opened before they were able to finish setting up the store. As I walked past it, my pulse slowed. I could see the bathroom sign hanging from the ceiling overhead and moved in that direction. As soon as I got Deborah out of the bathroom, we were going to get out of there and blow every stoplight between Owingsville and Lexington. Then I heard footsteps. When I turned to face the clothing section, I could see the bright red mannequin was off the pedestal. It stood on the bright white tiles of the walkway. In only a moment, the thing had moved at least 15 feet in my direction. There was no one around. "What the hell?" I said it aloud. Slowly, I began to walk backward toward the bathroom, keeping my eyes locked on the mannequin. It didn't move, but I had the uncomfortable feeling that it was watching me with its featureless face. Sweat began to pour from my forehead. Suddenly, there were steps behind me. I spun around to see another red mannequin standing about 100 feet on the other side of me. As I looked in its direction, I could hear more footsteps behind my back. When I turned, the mannequin from the clothing department was a few feet closer to me. Before I could collect my thoughts, both of the shining red mannequins burst into a spring toward me. I panicked and ran into the aisle behind me. Their hard feet clacked on the floor, easily making gains on me. 20 years past my prime, I wasn't used to much physical exertion anymore. I hadn't run more than 2 aisles, and I had already lost my breath. Entering a box of shelves, I turned to face the oncoming red mannequins. Desperate, I searched the shelves near me for a weapon. It was a home goods section, and I began to scan the shelves. At the end of the shelf to my right was a cheap-looking red-handled chef's knife. I lunged for it just in time. As I pulled off the plastic cover, the 2 red men came around the corner. I extended the knife toward both of them, and they stopped. Both of them tilted their heads sideways, like confused dogs. They turned toward each other as one of them began tapping a hard finger against their palm. It sounded like Morse code. The other began making the same clicking noise. They simultaneously turned and walked toward a red support pillar a few feet behind them. I watched cautiously, scanning the area behind me occasionally. Their sudden disengagement made me as nervous as the pursuit itself. When they reached the red pillar, they both turned and placed their backs against it. Stretching their arms straight over their bodies, they tilted their heads back. The overhead speakers began to increase in volume rapidly. I watched as the 2 red men fell backward and vanished into the pillar. My mind struggled to comprehend what I had just seen. The store was quiet again. I could feel the throbbing of my temples intensify. Once I snapped myself out of the momentary daze, I began moving cautiously toward the bathrooms again. I moved slowly, checking each aisle before I passed to the next one, always looking for the red men. Always listen for the slightest sign of another person. It felt like an eternity, but finally, I made it to the bathroom hallway. The lights there flickered wildly, and the music dissipated. On the left was the men's restroom, and on the right was the women's. I ran quickly toward the door, gripped the handle, and pulled it open. Behind the door was a red brick wall. I slammed my fist against it in frustration. "Darren," I heard a muffled voice say it from behind the brick wall. "Darren, is that you?" "Deborah?" I shouted. "Are you okay? I'm right outside. Is there a way to get out?" "No," she whimpered, "but I think I hear." Her sentence was cut short by a blood-curdling scream. I could hear thrashing and dull thuds through the red bricks. I screamed her name over and over, but she never replied. The room behind the brick wall fell silent. Then the clicking of footsteps began to sound at the end of the hallway. I turned my head to see dozens of shiny red men blocking the hall. Their heads were all tilted at different angles. Some had lengths of pipe in their smooth grips, while others held assorted kitchen knives. A chain was swinging lazily from the hand of the red man in front of the horde. My eyes darted back and forth between the crowd, the brick wall blocking me from my wife, and the group of demonic red mannequins. I began to cry loudly, accepting that I couldn't save Deborah. Hell, I couldn't even save myself. In resignation, I fell backward. As my back met what I thought was the dead end of the hallway, I was surprised to feel the push bar of a door that wasn't there. Moments before hitting the small of my back, the door gave way and I tumbled backward, slamming hard against the ground. My vision was swimming as I watched the door marked "Emergency Exit" slam closed. I blacked out. When I came, I was in a field. The tall grass was brushing against my face, and the rustling sounds of nocturnal animals filled the night air. My head was throbbing, and for a moment, I couldn't recall why I was on the ground. I pushed myself up from the ground and reached forward to grab the door handle, but found nothing. There was only an empty field in front of me. Moonlight reflected from my car windshield in the distance. The building was gone. The hundreds of yellow cars had disappeared. Grass and weeds replaced the parking lot. That was 7 months ago. I called the Owensville Police Department, which came to the scene to investigate. They took my statement and looked at me in bewilderment as the story of the now absent Target store became odder with each passing sentence. "There's never been a Target in Owensville," said one of the officers. "Not the kind of place that sets up shop around here." Deborah never returned. She's been listed as a missing person the entire time. Detectives from Owensville and Lexington have interviewed me more times than I can count. They've served me search warrants for the house and both of our cars. We interviewed every damn person both of us knew. No one talks to me anymore. Our friends won't answer my calls. My family won't talk to me. Her family hired a private investigator. I see the greasy bastard following me sometimes. Hell, I even quit my job. They couldn't fire me, but they made sure I knew I wasn't wanted there anymore. I miss my wife, but everyone thinks I killed her. My life is falling apart, but maybe it will change. I've got to call the detective soon. When I checked the mail today, there was something strange in there. Something that gives me a little hope. It was a Target mailer, the same one Deborah showed me all those months ago, just advertising a different location. Target would like to welcome you to our newest location in Paris. K. Bring this ad to the registered for an additional 10C off of your first purchase. There was the same group of red-vested employees smiling at the camera, cheesy grins and everything. Right in the middle was a face I knew so well. She was smiling the same smile I'd seen 1,000 times. Deborah. My mother forced me to play hide and seek every night at 9. One night, it wasn't a game. My mother always made me play hide and seek with her. It was just her and me, and we played at 9. Each time, without fail, she told me to ignore her during the game. She told me that she would purposefully try to trick me. But, if you really wanted to trick somebody, why tell them anything? We played in the park. I thought this was normal. I knew other families didn't do this, but at the same time, I thought there was nothing wrong with us doing it. I liked the park after all. During the night, the air was so fresh, it was silent, and the trees seemed larger than usual. She counted down from 100. Giving me ample time to run away. My general competitiveness always made me run as far away as I could. I'd find some space behind many trees, and I'd lie down. The park was large, but somehow my mother would always manage to walk past me at least 3 times in those 20 minutes. I'd always hear her speaking as she walked past me. "Come out, Clara. Clara, please come out. I'm sick of the stupid game, Clara. It's cold, and I just want to go home." I ignored her. When we first started with the games, I'd been foolish enough to leave my hiding spot. My mother's face immediately turned into one of fury. She'd walk up and grab me tightly by the shoulder as she scolded me relentlessly. "I told you not to listen to me, didn't I?" She would drag me back to the car and ignore me until the next day, when we played. I didn't know why she did it. After I'd stopped listening to her during the 20 minutes of game time, it would no longer trick me. I knew she was lying, and it simply seemed like a waste of breath and energy to keep calling out for me. She got angry when she found me. The park was a huge place, and if she hid somewhere, I would never find her, but somehow my mother was excellent at tracking me down. It was like she sniffed me and hunted me down. Instead of getting angry at me, she got disappointed. She'd sigh loudly, and her eyes would tear up before she'd dejectedly walk to the car. That gave me the worst feeling ever, filling me with inadequacy. One time, she found me after only 2 minutes, and she broke down, sobbing. I didn't get it. I felt a huge urge to win. I needed it, so I started to get creative. I hid myself in the bushes. I'd change my clothing to be more green and black, and generally more inconspicuous. I got high up in trees so it would be difficult to see me from the ground. I learned how to stay still. Really, really still. And when I won, my mother would give me a smile. It wasn't a smile of happiness or pleasure. It was more of a relieved smile. But I felt so proud when I saw it. We'd go home, and I'd have an easy time falling asleep. Then my father came. One day, when I came back from school, I saw him talking to my mother. He was almost never home. Actually, I'd seen him twice in my entire life, and my mother never really spoke about him. He was really just a stranger to me. I noticed the expression on my mother's face immediately. It was pale, white, shaking, eyes wide. I couldn't hear what he was saying, so I got closer to them. Of course, their conversation stopped just as I did. Well, my father stopped speaking, and the expression on my mother stayed the same. He turned to me and smiled in a wolfish way. It made me recoil with disgust. He sneered. He fucking sneered. I thought it was normal. After all, that was how my classmates acted. Later that same day, when my father was off in the toilet, my mother got close to me and whispered, "Don't come out. Not even after 20 minutes." My father got really energetic right before bedtime. I thought we'd skip the whole hide and seek thing. My mom looked really sick, and looking at the clock, she said, "Let's take a trip to the park." I immediately noticed that she didn't mention hide and seek. "Why?" my father asked. "Why not? Get some fresh air, maybe." "Fine," he said. "I like them active anyway." What the hell did he mean by that? Mom told me to change with a certain look, and I caught what she meant immediately. Put on hiding clothes. After doing it, we got into the car and drove to the park. My mother was silent the entire way, but my father hummed. We walked together in the park for a while, my dad mumbling about work. I don't remember much of it. Honestly, it didn't sound like any job I'd ever heard of. Then suddenly, my mother pointed at a tree in the distance. I noticed that it was the same tree she'd found me hiding behind the last time she'd caught me. These trees get so old. Then they die. It's a shame they're stuck in place, unable to get away from the virus. She was saying, "Get away and hide." "Death is the way of all living things," Dad said. "No need to fear it." "I think I saw a squirrel in that tree," I said. "I'm going to go check it out." I vanished into the forest, to which I'd grown accustomed. I got behind a hill before changing direction and moving away. I made sure to try to move on the spots that wouldn't leave a mark. I needed to get far away before they noticed something was up. I thought about climbing a tree and hiding there, or about diving into a couple of bushes. Trees were only effective if people didn't check. Bushes worked great, but you'd have a small, if no, view of your surroundings. I chose the bushes, jumping into them and trying to control my breath. After a couple of minutes, I heard my parents walking in the distance. "Clara!" Dad shouted. "Where are you, sweetheart? If you're hurt, please say something and we'll help." "Clara," Mother said. "Clara, can you hear me, darling?" My heart beats faster. I knew for a fact that I shouldn't leave the bushes. That was the absolute worst thing that could happen. I kept my breathing under check as they moved further and further away from me. Then, they came back. "Please, Clara, your dad isn't dangerous. Please come out. Clara, please, I need to get going soon. Please come out." "Clara," Mom said, "where are you?" "Stop this silly nonsense," Dad said. Their voices eventually faded out. I stayed there, in the same position, for nearly an hour. My body started to ache, and I could feel insects crawling around on the back of my leg. I really wanted to leave this position. I heard a stick snap in the distance. It came from behind me. I hadn't heard their voices at all. Had they just stopped speaking? That terrified me, and I felt I needed to turn around and get a view. But I knew that would give me away. "Clara, stop with this silly nonsense. Come out." I was entirely silent. "Clara, please come out." Her voice was turning more and more desperate, more guttural. Unfortunately, it seemed to be around 70 meters away from me, but she was approaching. "Clara," Mom said, "I'm getting tired. I just want to go home, eat, and sleep." I stayed silent as the voice grew louder. "I know you're in the area. It's only a matter of time before I find you. I will skin you. Haha. I'll start with your forearms, peeling off your skin with a dull knife, just like peeling back cheese. I wager there'll be lots of blood coming out, and screaming. I won't be able to focus, but that's all right. I can always switch to your other arm." She came closer. "You won't like it." "I certainly wouldn't, but I'm not as stupid and fucking disgusting as you are, Clara. No, I'm glad I'm not a creature of filth like you. The only good you can do is by being in my belly, by fueling me. I'll find you." The voice was only 20 meters away. "You'll regret not coming out." 10 meters. You know, I don't eat the bones. They get stuck in my throat. But I can't leave them. I'll probably take them home with me and suck on them. They have good taste, you know. It'll be perfect. 2 meters. She giggled. Did she find me? Oh no. I debated whether I should stay still and hope for the best, or if I should look back. My fear was killing me, and it had to know, but I knew looking would make noise. No, I had to stay still. "I know where you are," she said. Fuck. But then she began walking away from my spot. "I'll suck on your eyeballs before swallowing them. They're always wet and squishy, so they go down the throat easily. If not, there's always blood. Oh, a mouthful of warm blood. Is there a better feeling?" I stayed still for that entire night, even after I was certain that they'd gone away. It was only when the sun was above me and I could hear other children that I stood up. One child jumped back and shrieked. He must have gotten properly terrified. Then, I made my way back home. Dad wasn't there, but Mom was. She hugged me.